Wow, you guys decided to listen to episode 2. Awesome. All right, you made it this far. All right, there's no turning back now. Anyway, so this is episode 2 of my Mormon memory. This is an episode where I dive into my faith crisis from the very beginning, when I decided to think to myself, it's not what I thought. And I'm going to dive right into I don't even know how many episodes this is going to be, but this is phase 1 of this podcast. It's my faith crisis. I think my faith crisis began around the time I was going to school at Utah Valley University. I was about 32 years old. I think I was about 32. So it was about 2012, I think 2012. And I was working in an LDS publishing company at the time, and part-time, and I was going to school trying to graduate and get a degree in web development. And that was about the time where my faith crisis started. By the time I was already married in the temple, I was active, went to the temple every month. Once a month I was going to the temple. I was a full tithe payer. I was legit. I was really in. So yeah, and I just had I had one kid and I had another kid on the way. And life was moving forward as expected. And then stuff started to happen and unravel. Things started to unravel. And I kind of pinpoint about the time when I heard a talk from Elder Jeffrey R. Harlan. He gave a talk, I think it was in General Conference in 2012. I don't remember. He gave a talk this was the talk where I don't even know what the name of the talk was, but he had the book. He had a Book of Mormon on his hand, and it was an old Book of Mormon that Joseph Smith supposedly had. And he was waving around. He's just like, this book is undefeated. This is the 96 Chicago Bulls. Well, he didn't say that, but he was pretty much saying that the Book of Mormon is undefeated. It's never going to be taken away. It's unstoppable. The Book of Mormon has been attacked so many times, but it still stands tall. I don't know what talk this was, but I always consider this is the pinpoint. This is the start of my faith crisis, because in that talk that Elder Holland gave in General Conference, he mentioned a bunch of stuff, how people keep attacking this book and it still stands. It's unstoppable. And he mentioned Solomon Spaulding in the talk, and I remember I'm just like, who the hell is that? I can swear on this podcast. I don't know. I don't care. Who the hell is Solomon Spaulding? I've never heard of that name before, and I was just like, I was at my job at an LDS publishing company. We were publishing LDS themed books and stuff, and I was just like, I Google searched Solomon Spaulding, and I'm just like, what? I was just listening to because I thought it was such a boss talk. I'm like, yeah, Holland, you're giving it to the anti-Mormon scum out there, and I was just like, to hell with them, and church is true, and I was listening to this talk from General Conference as I was, at my job, and I was listening on headphones, and I looked up Solomon Spaulding, and I'm just like, who the hell is this guy? And I looked him up. I was thinking of some anti-Mormon or some street protester, and I find out it's this guy that lived a long time ago, during the time, before Joseph Smith, and he wrote a book called View of the Hebrews. And I'm just like, oh, he wrote an old book. And I looked it up, and I found out that the book that he wrote was a book about the Americas and about Jews coming to America. And like I said, I'm not going to get all this information right. This is just from my memory. Now, I'm not a history buff, but this is what I discovered. It's a book called View of the Hebrews. It's about a bunch of Jews coming to America, ancient America, and then there's similarities to the Book of Mormon, pretty much. That's what this book was. And I'm just like, I was just shocked. I'm just like, what? There's another book out there that came out around the time Joseph Smith was alive that's exactly like the Book of Mormon, similar. That kind of just hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm like, what? And it kind of sucks for Elder Holland saying that in his talk, because I don't know if I'm the only person that Google searched Solomon Spaulding, but he mentioned it in the talk. And so I looked it up, and sure enough, I have a crack in my shelf. I'm just like, I put it on the shelf. I'm just like, that's really strange. So there's a book called View of the Hebrews that came out in the 1800s, just about the time Joseph Smith was around, and it has similarities to the Book of Mormon. The plot was very similar. And I'm just like, what the crap? I've never heard this before. I thought the Book of Mormon was unique. The only book out there where it talks about Jews coming to America and then Jesus comes. I thought that was it. And then I'm just like, what the crap? Anyway, it was the craziest thing. And then I kind of put it on my shelf, metaphorical shelf that Mormons believe. They put doubts. If Mormons have doubts, if you're a never Mormon, this is what it means to put something on a shelf. All right, you're a true believing Mormon. And you hear stuff about Joseph Smith and how stuff he did, or polygamy and all these stuff that could damage your faith and testimony. You just ignore it and you just put it on a shelf, a metaphorical shelf. You put it on the shelf and just ignore it. And then in time, you'll eventually get answers for those issues, which you don't. And eventually the shelf starts to crack. You start putting more and more stuff on the shelf, more issues that you find in church history. You put it on a shelf and it eventually breaks. Now, this was one of the first few major cracks to my shelf. It was finding out about View of the Hebrews, all thanks to Elder Holland. Thanks, Holland. Anyway, so that's what started the faith crisis, I feel like. This was kind of a moment where I'm just like, okay, something's not right here. And I mean, I had doubts before. There was stuff that happened. I heard stuff about church history years before, but this was the first big, the first stone that started to roll down the mountain that created the avalanche for my faith crisis. And that was Holland's talk. Anyway, it wasn't long after that when I discovered the rock in the hat. Now, I was on Wikipedia one day and I looked up Joseph Smith on Wikipedia, and they showed a picture in Wikipedia article. I don't know if it's still there, but it showed him looking in. It was like a drawing of him looking into a hat. And on the bottom it said, Joseph Smith translates the Book of Mormon by reading into a hat. I was just like, what the seriously, what? I never heard this before. I'm like, that's a bunch of BS. Who wrote this? It's Wikipedia. Anyone can go there and write whatever the hell they want. A whole bunch of crazy stuff. And I'm just like, what a bunch of anti-Mormon crap on this. This is stupid. This is crazy. And I was just like, rocking a hat? No, those golden plates. He used golden plates. Right? What the heck? That was just the weirdest thing. And I remember I was just like, whatever. And then I saw at the same time I saw that South Park episode. Everyone always talks about it, and I've never seen South Park before. Yeah. And I saw that episode that has the Mormons in it, and it sure enough, this was like a month later, and I see the part where in the South Park episode it shows Joseph Smith looking into the hat, and I'm just like, there it is again, what the hell? And then I'm like, okay, it must be something that South Park came up with. The creators of South Park, a bunch of anti-Mormons, they did that, and then all the people that love South Park and watched that episode of South Park, they wrote in the Wikipedia article all this anti-Mormon lies, about Joseph Smith, and that he wrote the Book of Mormon by putting his face into a hat, which is a bunch of ridiculous stuff. I was never taught that growing up. It was always the golden plates. And so, Joseph Smith found golden plates, and then he translated them, and that's how the Book of Mormon started. That's the story that I was raised with in the church. No, I never heard once in my life that he used a rock. He put a rock in a hat and put his face in it, and that's how but that's what South Park said, and that's what the Wikipedia article said, and I'm just like, what the hell? I've never heard that before. And I even served a mission, and I don't think I ever heard that. It was the weirdest thing. It was almost like it came into existence, like it came into reality. It was just like all of a sudden that's the story. But then I'm just like, it's just another anti-Mormon lie these crazy people are coming up with to destroy the church, And then I was going to UVU at the time in college, and I had a classmate. His name was Rob, cool guy. We were like in a film class making a movie or something, and he was kind of on the fence. He's kind of inactive, and he was talking about the rock in a hat. He's just like, yeah, I got doubts. I don't believe in the church anymore. And this was the whole time during Jimmermania. If anyone follows college basketball, Jimmermania was a basketball player who played for BYU, and he was Jimmer Fredette. He was a basketball player who played for BYU. Really good player. He didn't do very well in the NBA, but he made BYU basketball pretty good. They were a top 5 program at the time, and they were about to go to the NCAA tournament, and I was expecting them to get to the Final Four, which they didn't. They lost to a mediocre Florida team. But anyway, everyone was talking about BYU basketball. Yeah, I'm going to watch the game. They're going to play Gonzaga. It's like the only time they beat Gonzaga in a tournament. But anyway, they beat Gonzaga that day in the NCAA tournament. But I remember he was just like, I don't want to watch BYU. I don't care about BYU. And then he goes off about how he doesn't go to church anymore. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. But then he brought up the Rock in the Hat. I'm just like, what? There it is again. He brought up the Rock in the Hat. And I'm just like, what is going on? Why am I hearing about this now? I think I was like 30 at the time. I was 30 years old. Yeah, because this was 2012. And I'm just like, actually it was 2011. So I wasn't even 30 yet. And I spent so many years in the church and never heard about the Rock in the Hat. And all of a sudden I've heard it 3 times already in the past like 6 months. I was so confused. And I'm just like, there it is again. And I was just like, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's something seriously going on here. But then what I did was I just put it back on my shelf. Another doubt that I have about the church, I put on the shelf. It's okay. These things will be answered in due time. Doubt your doubts. And put the doubts on the shelf and just ignore them and pretend they're not there. Turn it off like a light switch, And at the same time, I was almost graduated. I was almost done with school. I was in the process of graduating with a bachelor's degree at Utah Valley University. But you got to understand, I've always had doubts. I mean, I'm not always doubts. I've always had a testimony, but there was always stuff in about the church that always kind of bothered me. The Rock in the Hat was the first major step to my shelf cracking and falling apart, but I had doubts about how the church really started, because when I was in high school years ago, back in the late 90s, when I was in high school, I remember I was in a camp trip with the youth in my ward, and we went on a school trip, not a school trip, a ward camp out somewhere by Manti, central Utah somewhere. And on the way home, the ward leader put in a cassette tape, and it was about church history. These cassettes were about church history, but they brought up everything. They brought up polygamy and Joseph Smith polygamy and all that stuff. I remember one part in the cassette tape talked about Joseph Smith came after me and tried to marry my wife, and I'm leaving the church. It's, I'm just like, what the crap? I'm like, well, he only had one wife. It was Emma. But then I'm like, I've never heard this before. And this was about the time I was a junior in high school and I was going to seminary. And I remember, I was never told this stuff in seminary, about Joseph Smith having other wives and coming after other men's wives. Never heard about this stuff. This was like, this was another huge crack to my shelf as a kid in my youth. But then I put it on the shelf, and it was just like, and for the longest time, the church never talks about Joseph Smith being a polygamist. And that always kind of bothered me. I'm like, oh, they always talk about Emma and then the movies that came out in the 2000s that showed Joseph Smith and Emma. I'm just like, well, I swear to God, once I heard a cassette tape that talked about him being a polygamist and going after other men's wives. I'm like, what the hell? They didn't bring that up. I felt like they were kind of secretly covering up their history that they don't want people to know about. They were trying to have a certain narrative. And anyway, this was the beginning of my faith crisis. And this is when I started to question the church. And I was scared to, because, my wife and I were true believers. We were active. We were going to the temple once a month. We were married in the temple. We were like I was the only sibling that got married in the temple, and I was so proud of that. And I was just like an example for my parents that were less active at the time. All my siblings are less active or left the church. And I'm just like, yeah, look at me. I was kind of cocky back then. I'm just like, yeah, I got married in the temple, and my wife and I are happy, and we're starting a family, and I'm going to graduate in a few months, and I'm working at a church publishing company, and I'm kicking ass and taking names, and humble brag, and I'm the only active person in the family, and I'm a good example. And I really was kind of pretty arrogant, and I was starting to doubt the church inside, and I was terrified about it. Anyway, at the same time, a few months before I graduated, one of my classes, he had a representative from the church office building come to his class, his web design class, to talk to us about working for the church in the church office building. And I remember going to that class. I don't even think I was supposed to go that day. But, it's one of those things where I'm just like, that was one of the worst decisions of my life, because it started a whole butterfly effect of what's to come next. So this guy comes over from the church office building in my class at my college, and there was only like 10 people in the class this day, and the teacher sits down, and lets the guy from the church office building speak to us. And he was like 5 feet tall, really short guy, but he was in a suit and tie. He kind of looked like a, really, really typical LDS employee, or he kind of reminded me of a few zone leaders I had on my mission, just kind of the personality and kind of just old business, and he got up and he starts talking about, he has a PowerPoint presentation of what it's like to work for the church and what you can do, and you're going to be working with my team. And he was a manager of the publishing team, and he was showing all the stuff they did on LDS.org. Back then it was called LDS.org. I think it's Come Unto Christ right now. ComeUntoChrist.org. They changed it. They rebranded the name, but it used to be LDS.org. It was their main website. And it's a massive website with different translations, different languages. And he was all like, this is what we do at the church office building. It was nicknamed the Cobb Church Office Building. And this is what we do. And you want to work for me? It was pretty much a recruitment. It was just like, I want you to join my team. And I remember the whole time I was just like, I don't want to work for the church. That sounds like it sucks. I was working for a church publishing company at the time, but that wasn't, it was pretty laid back. It wasn't like the actual church office building. It was just a warehouse. And I was putting together like ebooks. I was pretty much going through archives and translating old books from the 90s into digital format for this publishing company. And they're all pretty much just Mormon books, like Tennis Shoes Among the Lamanites, or whatever that book series was called. I don't know. That was one of the books I translated. But I was just like, I'll never work for the church. That would suck. It'd be like serving a mission again. I have to dress up and look all Sunday nice and stuff. And I was a true believing Mormon, but I was still kind of a little, I still kind of thought like, oh yeah, I still want to be a human being, I want a normal job. I was still thinking, I don't want to work for the church. But for some reason, deep inside of me, something told me, talk to him. And afterwards, and I remember the whole time just like, no, I don't want to work for the church. That's ridiculous. Plus, I live in Utah Valley. The church office building's in Salt Lake. It's an hour commute. I don't want to commute an hour just to get to work every day. But then I just thought, for some reason, just talk to him. My job at the publishing company is not going to last. It was a part-time job that was almost done. I was almost done there. So I was looking for a new job before I graduated in college. So I'm just like, what the hell? Like everyone else is just like, see ya, I'm out of here. So I was the only person that talked to this guy. Yeah, I'm interested in a job interview at the church office building. And he was just like, yeah, okay. Here's my, let's schedule you for a week from today. Show up at the church office building and voila, we'll have you interviewed and see if we like you. And it's an on-call. It's an intern. They have interns, but they call them on-calls for some reason. And I'll explain more of that in the next episode. So I had a job interview at the church office building. And I remember driving home. I'm just like, okay, I don't know what I just did, but a job interview at the church office building, that's kind of cool. And I was just like, okay, well, if I don't like it, then I won't work there. So that's when it all kind of started. And little did I know that was kind of a mistake. And I'm going to talk about my experience working for the LDS Church on the next episode. So episode 3. Thanks for listening for episode 2. This has been My Mormon Memory. Thank you.